Mr. Chairman.
I call the honourable member Shane Ardern.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute in this debate. Interesting, Mr. Chairman, to follow on from the Minister where he talked about the opportunities from irrigation. And if you had been listening to the debate earlier on environmental budgets or the estimates for environmental portfolios, you would have thought that this was going to be the end of the environment in New Zealand, when in fact the opposite could not be more the case. If you look at science, and of course we're asking for people to look at science, which is a step too far for more or less two-thirds of the opposition, as far as I can tell, to look at actual scientific evidence. And the reality is this: when irrigation was developed in the upper part of the North Island, in the Kaikoura-Nelson regions, during the late 70s and early 80s, large amounts of land were developed into viticulture. So I guess what we're saying is that those grapevines should go, that land should revert back to what it was there prior to the Pinot being planted and the Sauvignon Blanc, and then we would be in a much better position. Because you see, the automatic presumption is that if you irrigate land, then it's all going to go into dairy. And that in itself wouldn't be a bad thing, because there is plenty of technology now to mitigate against the type of environmental effects that they talk about. In fact, if they'd have gone to the field days, and I actually invite the Green Party to look at this technology and had a look at what some of the new innovation that was on display there in regard to environmental sustainable use of land and water, then they would not hold this Luddite position that they do. So let's just have a look at what actually has been achieved in the dairy sector, in the primary industries area, in the last wee while. Well, the Clean Streams Accord, 87% of the streams and rivers and lakes and 90% of the races or access ways for cattle have now been fenced and bridged. No other industry has achieved that in that time. 99% of dairy farms have nutrient budgets. Now, I'm not asking those that are in the House to understand what that means, but what it basically means is that all nutrients that are applied are budgeted and calculated against what is used. And it's not very hard to understand. A warrant of fitness system for dairy effluent management, which is controlled both by the regional councils and the dairy companies that they supply. Dairy effluent non-compliance is less than 10% nationally and coming down, substantially reducing each year. Research for reducing greenhouse gas emissions based on science, once again, and New Zealand's investment in this area is world-leading. Why don't we hear the Greens or Labor from time to time touching on that? Dairy companies implementing stringent criteria in terms of their supply regimes. Why don't we hear from the Labor members, who I know are passionate about increasing wages, about what has actually happened in terms of dairy worker wage limits or wage rises in recent times? And why don't we hear the stories of the young couples now in that sector earning $130,000, what they call the total value package? Why don't we hear that? Because the majority of them in the larger operations, in a mid-management position, are earning that money and more, and some up to $300,000 and $400,000. Where do we hear that? Where do the Green parties talk about that? Why don't we hear about the massive investment that's going on in local communities through in philanthropic ways, through the like of milk in schools, for example? There's one starting point. Apart from all of the local investment that goes on in small towns and communities in regard to philanthropic activity, all driven on the back of investment in our primary sectors. So why is it, Mr. Chairman, that we constantly hear the negative carping background that we hear from our opposition? Why don't we start celebrating the areas that we are good? Why don't we get over the fact that we are an agricultural nation? We do depend on our agricultural sectors. 72% of our export earnings come from the agricultural sector. Now, I can't help it if two-thirds of the members in this House don't like that. I can't help it. It doesn't change the fact. And if they do want to develop something else to replace it, please do. But let's not pretend there's some silver bullet. This is a sector that will grow the New Zealand economy faster than any other sector.
That's right. Mr. Chair, I call the honourable member David Shearer.